We're proud to support the craft of journalism. UBS brings you the latest news from around the world with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Be part of an international network that brings together leading insights, research, and technology across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs, with you at the center of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 4th of August 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, there will be further peace talks between Thailand and Cambodia this week. We'll hear from a former Cambodian politician and Nobel Peace Prize nominee who analyses the situation and the likely outcome. Then,
we feel that Mr. Witkoff is very much with the families. He feels us, he understands us, and he said that he's going back to Washington, where he will share these stories with the president himself.
US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has been in Tel Aviv addressing families of hostages. But how seriously can anyone take his assurances that he and the Israeli government will end the war? We'll have a look through the newspapers, including coverage of the 39% trade tariff the US has slapped on Switzerland. Oh, the country is still an appealing destination, however. We'll hear why some Portuguese citizens have decided they would rather swap the Med for the lakes and the mountains. Singapore is preparing to celebrate 60 years of independence. We'll be in the city-state to chart its prosperity since 1965. The trial of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina has begun in absentia in Bangladesh. She's accused of crimes against humanity. We'll examine the political implications for the country. Then,
and the thing here is that it's new generations coming in all the time. So you see a lot of 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds with their own American cars.
We'll hear about the US subculture trend currently sweeping Sweden. And finally, Karen Krasanovic joins us from her latest movie set to bring us up to date with news from the world of cinema. That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. Over 60 migrants drowned off Yemen after their boat capsized in rough seas, with dozens still missing in one of the deadliest incidents in recent months. Boeing faces a new crisis as over 3,000 defence workers prepare to strike today after rejecting a pay and pension offer. And a 2-year-old girl was found alive in a suitcase on a New Zealand bus, prompting child neglect charges against a 27-year-old woman. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, an uneasy ceasefire remains in place between Cambodia and Thailand after armed clashes erupted in the border areas on July the 24th. The agreement, brokered by Malaysia with input from the US and China, was signed on July the 28th. And this week, representatives will meet again in Kuala Lumpur to attempt to resolve the century-old tension between the two countries. Well, I'm joined now by Sakua Mu, who is president of the Khmer Movement for Democracy. Sakua served as a politician in Cambodia before fleeing into exile under threat of arrest. She was also nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2005. Sakura, it's really lovely to have you with us. To fully understand this conflict, which has been bubbling for decades, it would be really useful to get the background and context from a Cambodian perspective. Can you tell us more?
Yes, good morning and thank you for having me. The disputes between Cambodia and Thailand goes back to the 10th or the 11th century. But I want to move forward to the 20th century when between 1904 to 1907, France and Siam, or Thailand at the time, signed treaties that transferred some of the Khmer or Cambodian provinces that were taken by Thailand back to the French-controlled Cambodia. As you know, Cambodia was under the French colony years for close to a century. Now, the treaties between the France and Thailand laid the groundwork for disputes, especially over sacred and cultural significant sites. And these cultural sites are, for sure, were built by the Khmer Cambodian kings. For example, the Preh Temple, and this is where the dispute really started again. In 1962, the International Court of Justice awarded Preh Temple, a sacred temple built by the Khmer king, to Cambodia. In 2008, tensions reignited after UNESCO listed Preh as a World Heritage Site under Cambodia's nomination. Again, in 2013, the International Court of Justice clarified that the area surrounding the temple also belongs to Cambodia. And Thailand until today has not conceded and has not respected the decision of ICJ. That is the problem today.
So what's your take on the current situation?
I think we are Cambodians all over the world, inside and outside of Cambodia, are very pleased to hear the announcement of a ceasefire between Cambodia and Thailand. And we hope this will lay the groundwork for lasting peace. Cambodians all over the world, and I've just come back from a big protest in South Korea, all over the world, Cambodians are saying, one Cambodia, we are united, we want peace, and we really do want peace.
So what steps need to be taken to achieve lasting peace?
I think we have to, first of all, look at peace and the whole picture of peace. Okay, at this moment, we're talking peace, meaning the end of disputes, the battles between Cambodia and Thailand. And I want to clarify that none of these two countries can afford to have a long-lasting war. We want peace. I think what is important to know is that today we have the U.S. that has used the tariffs as incentives to achieve the ceasefire. We're talking about the ceasefire. And these negotiations are happening right now in Malaysia. And the role of Malaysia is important because Malaysia today is the chair of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. ASEAN has a core principle, which is of non-interference. But this is a unique case for ASEAN, of ASEAN Malaysia. Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim take a really active role with the United States to help make the ceasefire last is very significant. However, to make it work, it has to be between Thailand and Cambodia. And Thailand has, first of all, has to respect the decision of the International Court of Justice. It has to start there. Otherwise, the disputes will go on. And it's very fragile. These areas are very fragile because the border is really, really exposed. So many villages that can be and are already impacted by these disputes.
Sakua, thank you very much indeed. That's Sakua Mu, who's president of the Khmer Movement for Democracy there. This is The Globalist. Let's now go to the Middle East for an update on the situation in Gaza and the latest coming out of Israel. I'm joined by Greg Karlstrom, Middle East correspondent and author of How Long Will Israel Survive? The Threat from Within. Greg, I wonder if you could recap what was announced at the UN last week and how significant the so-called New York Declaration is.
This was the result of a meeting organized by France and Saudi Arabia. They had been planning for months to organize a conference to talk about not just the war in Gaza, but the two-state solution more broadly, trying to find an end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And there was a lot of focus last week on Western countries recognizing Palestine or committing to recognize Palestine. There was less focus on this declaration, which was arguably, I think, more significant or at least more symbolic, which came out from the entirety of the Arab League, every Arab country, along with a number of other members at this conference, who agreed to condemn Hamas, to condemn the attacks of October 7th, to call on Hamas to disarm and to basically suggest that an armed Hamas should have no role in political life or public life in the Palestinian territory. So it was, I think, by far the most sort of sweeping, united condemnation of Hamas that we've seen from Arab countries, not just over the past 2 years, but ever. And the call for Hamas to disarm is something that, you would think a couple of years ago, the Israeli government would have been quite happy to see, would have welcomed, and would have made a big deal out of.
How has Hamas responded over the weekend?
They have predictably insisted that they're not going to disarm unless a Palestinian state is established. And, that has been their position for many years. It hasn't changed. It shows you how stubborn they have been on this issue, how intransigent they have been. I think speaking to both Western and Arab officials over the past 2 years, there's a growing belief that Hamas is willing to relinquish civil authority in Gaza. It will let someone else administer the territory, govern it day to day. I mean, they don't want to be in charge of Gaza right now because it is utterly destroyed. And so they're happy to dump that problem on the Palestinian Authority or on some other governing body. But no one thinks that they are willing to relinquish their weapons. And so I think their reaction to that declaration, not at all surprising.
So the US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff's been in the region, and he told families of hostages being held by Hamas that he was working with the Israeli government on a plan that would effectively end the war. Do we know what that is?
Well, we don't exactly. I think we need to see what that means in practice. For months now, Witkoff and the whole Trump administration have been pushing for a partial phased ceasefire. There would be an initial 60-day truce. Some hostages would be released, and then they were meant to use those 60 days to negotiate a permanent end to the war. Very similar to the deal that took effect in January, that 6-week ceasefire. That, again, was supposed to be one of 3 phases, was supposed to lead to a permanent end to the fighting. That never happened. And a growing number of people, not just in the United States, but in Israel as well, have been critical of the Trump administration for trying that phased approach, because that basically allows Netanyahu to get what he wants, which is to prolong the war. Maybe he'll get some hostages released, but there's no guarantee that he will negotiate in good faith over a permanent ceasefire. So Witkoff saying now, it's time to drop the phased approach and look for a permanent end to the war that would release all of the Israeli hostages. In theory, it's good that he's saying that. That is the right approach. That's something this administration should have done months ago. But let's see how much pressure they're willing to bring to bear on Prime Minister Netanyahu, who still, of course, does not want to end the war.
Well, and that's a very fair point. I mean, how much pressure is Israel's government under? I mean, particularly from their own people, this huge gathering yesterday of hostage families. Is there any sign that Netanyahu is listening?
Not really, no, because there is pressure from the Israeli public, but it's not pressure that right now poses any political threat, I think, to his government. We've seen protests for more than a year now, large protests by the families of hostages and their supporters. They've shut down motorways in Tel Aviv. They've staged sit-ins outside the prime minister's residence. They've been doing this for a long time. Netanyahu has shrugged that off because his own supporters, his own voters, are not the ones protesting. There's been increasing criticism from former politicians, former army chiefs, heads of the Mossad, the Shin Bet, the Israeli security services, almost all of whom now are demanding an end to the war and saying that it's ultimately damaging Israel's strategic interests to continue it. Again, Netanyahu can shrug that off. I think unless he starts seeing real pressure from his own voters, his own supporters, that might make him think that continuing the war is not in his political interests, I don't think any of this domestic pressure is going to get through.
I mean, this part of this hostage family demonstration yesterday came after Hamas released a video showing visibly emaciated hostages. And in fact, we've got a voice from Gaza. It's the medical activities manager in southern Gaza for Médecins Sans Frontières, Dr. Mohammed Fadlal. This is what he says.
It's not enough to let a trickle of some trucks in. From the reports, what has been let through has been far less than what's needed, and at a rate that's far slower than what's needed for the people here to benefit from it and to see a difference.
Well, what can you tell us about the awful situation within Gaza? This famine, basically.
He's correct that the amount of aid going in is still insufficient. There are more trucks of aid being cleared by Israel to enter Gaza. The United Nations then has to pick those up and deliver them, and that also requires coordination with the Israeli army. But they're letting about 200 trucks a day go into Gaza. That's well short of the 500 to 600 that the United Nations says is needed right now. There have been these sporadic airdrops organized by Arab countries. The quantities there are very, very small. The first airdrop last week by Jordan and the United Arab Emirates, they dropped 25 tons of food, which is less than 2 trucks worth of food. So not making a big difference given the scale of hunger and starvation in Gaza right now. And then you have this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, this Israeli US-backed entity that's been handing out a bit of food in a very chaotic, very dangerous way. But overall, the quantities are still not sufficient. And that's only food that we're talking about. When you have people, particularly children, who have been suffering from acute malnutrition, it's not just a matter of feeding them again. They also need to be hospitalized. They need to be monitored in a hospital setting and sort of slowly given, nutritious supplements and things to pull them out of being acutely malnourished. And that's simply not possible to do in Gaza right now, given the damage to the healthcare system over the past 2 years.
I mean, Greg, we've had the New York Declaration. There is no doubt that the world sees what's going on in Israel and is appalled by it. What other tools exist to force the country, to force Netanyahu and his government to end this and to allow more aid?
I think the options for Western governments outside of the United States are unfortunately rather limited. But I think by doing these symbolic recognitions of Palestine, as France and the UK and Canada agreed to do last week, my concern with those is that ultimately that may end up being counterproductive. You do that, you tick a box that says, we did something about Israel's war in Gaza, and then you don't have to discuss more substantive measures. Should Western governments now be talking about sanctions on Israeli politicians, Israeli officials, on arms sales to Israel? Those conversations probably aren't going to happen because you've now taken that symbolic step of recognizing Palestine. But I think even if the likes of France, Canada, the UK were to do those things, they wouldn't really sway Israeli policymaking. I think the only thing that will at this point is Donald Trump saying very, very clearly to Benjamin Netanyahu that the war needs to end. Short of that, I don't think Netanyahu is going to feel the sort of pressure that would force him to change course.
And how close is the US to saying that? I mean, we've seen hints of it.
We've seen hints of it, but I mean, really, who knows with Trump? He says one thing one day and another thing the next day. You talk to some people in Washington who say Trump is very frustrated with the Gaza war. He thinks this is, overshadowing everything else that he wants to do in the Middle East, be it expanding the Abraham Accords or trying to stabilize post-Assad Syria. All of that is being overshadowed by Gaza, and the president is very frustrated. But then you ask them, well, okay, what is the president going to do about that? And the answer is probably not much. He's not going to take punitive steps. He's not going to take a really hard line on Israel. It's very much like the conversations I was having last year with the Biden administration, which came to the same conclusion that the Israeli prime minister was continuing this war for his own political reasons, but ultimately did nothing about it.
Greg, thank you very much indeed. That's Greg Karlstrom there. And do tune in to the latest episode of The Foreign Desk for a deeper dive into the crisis in Gaza and the prospect of a Palestinian state. Still to come on the programme.
According to Publico's findings, Switzerland has replaced the UK as the most desirable for Portuguese expats, with over 12,000 choosing to move there in the last year.
We'll investigate why residents of Lisbon are now flocking to Lucerne. This is The Globalist.
Craft is its own reward, which is why at UBS we're honoured to work alongside over 50 of today's leading Nobel laureates, each an expert in the art of economic science, bringing you engaging discussions, actionable insights, and inspired solutions, all focused around the questions that shape our world today. For a better outlook, find a Nobel perspective. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Just coming up to 8:21 in Zurich, 7:21 here in London, and we'll continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me in the studio is Zoe Grunwald, who is the Westminster editor at The Lead. Good morning to you, Zoe.
Good morning.
Zoe, we have been scratching our heads here and really cannot understand the 39% tariffs that the US has slapped on Switzerland. Over the weekend, I had a guest in the studio, James Breeding. He is a Zurich-based investment banker. This is what he said.
It's really crazy because Switzerland is an exemplary model of the ideal trade partner. They're ranked number 7 in the world in terms of capital investment in the United States among 200 countries. So this is exactly the sort of relationship you should celebrate, and it's beyond me that why he would do this.
And beyond most of us, to be honest. Are the papers making much sense of it?
No, I think it's one of those things where it's very difficult to figure out why Trump makes many of the decisions that he does. But this is absolutely right that this is particularly puzzling because Switzerland, as we say, is one of the world's largest investors in the US. The Swiss say it's created 400,000 US jobs. And balancing that trade deficit, the thing that Trump points to as the reason why he often slaps these big tariffs on countries, looks almost impossible. You know, the population of Switzerland is small. It's just 9 million. And they don't really want to buy US products. You know, the cars are too big for Alpine roads. The idea of the Swiss buying US cheese and chocolate is something that I think we would probably raise our eyebrows at. Meanwhile, obviously, Switzerland will sell more. It has pharmaceuticals, services, gold, jewellery, watches and machines. It makes sense that there would be that imbalance. But for Trump and for his kind of, his MAGA brand, that trade deficit is really at the core of how he is basing his trade and economic policy across the world.
Switzerland's a rich country. They can afford it. Let's just tax the hell out of them. Extraordinary stuff. I want to turn now to people smuggling, because in our headlines we've been reporting this horrible tragedy off the coast of Yemen. But of course these things happen on the English Channel all the time. So the British government's now pledged an extra £100 million to tackle people smuggling. What's the detail on this?
Yes, so this 100 million will go to boosting border security and strengthening investigations, which will target kingpins who run these smuggling gang operations across Europe, the Middle East, Africa and elsewhere. And this will pay for additional National Crime Agency officers as well as new technology and equipment. So they're really hoping, this Labour government, to disrupt the criminal gangs that are selling boat spaces to people, putting people on boats, obviously getting hold of the dinghies and bringing them over to the country. The problem is that obviously these are incredibly sophisticated criminal networks that require international cooperation. They're not just based in one country. They go across the world. So yes, investment in technology to find them and disrupt them is important. But ultimately, this is also a matter of diplomacy and getting other countries on side to share their intelligence and be ensured that they will be interested in disrupting these operations as well, because at the minute it is a very kind of UK-based problem. Obviously other countries are seeing small boats, but to try and get other countries to buy into stopping channel crossings is quite difficult, especially post-Brexit.
But of course investment in the countries of origin would also be a very sensible way to do this.
Absolutely. And at the same time, this government have slashed their foreign aid budget as a means of balancing the books and trying to increase defence spending, which a lot of people say is counterproductive, because if you don't invest in other countries, you're far more likely to have those kind of global trends of mass migration occur.
Let's move on to plastics, because there's a review, there's a story in The Lancet, which has been picked up elsewhere, that there's a $1.5 trillion plastics crisis hitting health from infancy to old age.
Yeah, so this is a result of increasing plastic pollution, particularly the rapid increase in the production of single-use plastics. So that's things like drinks bottles and fast food containers that aren't properly recycled, and then of course are going back into our waterways, going back into our soil, and basically causing a public health disaster across the world. And as you said, this was picked up in The Lancet. And there is going to be now a negotiation between countries to try and come up with a legally blinding global plastics treaty. But many academics, many experts are saying it's already too late. You know, these microplastics are in our ecosystem now, and we have to start mitigating the impact of it, as well as trying to look forward and saying, how do we actually reduce the amount of plastics in our systems?
I mentioned James Breeding earlier. He was in the studio over the weekend. He's written this book, What David Can Teach Goliath or something. It's about when you look at small countries and see their successes and how that can be rolled out. And he was looking at plastics and saying that New Zealand is one country that's actually on the way to conquering this. They had a whole a supermarket brought in this thing going, food in the nude. And it was just it's a way of sort of making it kind of sexy to sell vegetables that isn't wrapped, everything kind of single wrapped, and getting rid of plastic bags and all the rest of it. I mean, Britain is making an effort with that in terms of single-use plastic.
Yeah, we have seen it. I mean, there's already a conversation about how do we reduce plastic, but a lot of the problem is also about recycling and just convincing people that when they do have those plastics that they recycle them properly, rather than just bunging everything in the bin and then obviously it getting back into our system that way.
Yeah, well, if plastics don't kill us, it appears that AI might.
A cheery set of papers this morning, yes.
Experts predict AI will lead to the extinction of humanity, possibly within a year.
Yes, it's pretty frightening, and I think some people might think it's a bit alarmist, but there are concerns about AI, and this is particularly the AGI, which is artificial general intelligence. This is when AI starts just teaching itself and teaching new systems very, very quickly, and it gets to the threshold where it can match human intelligence. And the worry is, of course, that there are lots of scenarios that unfortunately that scientists have come up with which could see AI killing us. But this one particularly is that, AI, if we set it a challenge, it might start to see humans as just getting in the way of whatever the challenge it has been set is, and could, for example, release a bio weapon or something that would kill everybody across the world, or just anything it will do it will assume that humans are in some way hampering its ability to complete its tasks. And the problem is, once you start that, it's very, very difficult to make it stop. So it is quite frightening when it's quite sci-fi when you put these ideas out there. But people. Scientists who have worked on artificial intelligence at Google and other places are saying we do need to start having these questions and thinking about how we can mitigate this, because they are very real threats.
Well, and so I was sort of reading this thinking, well, who's saying they're going to kill us? And one of them is Geoffrey Hinton. He won the Nobel Prize in Physics last year for his work on AI. And he's one of the guys going, this is going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And the calls are coming from inside the house. People who are working on these technologies are saying, saying, whoa, we need to be regulated because this stuff is crazy. It's getting out of control. But at the same time, especially if you look at the US and China, there is almost this arms race about we need to get the most advanced technology possible, and then we'll think about safety later. But of course, the people working on it are saying by that point, it might be too late.
Wow. Well, in the face of all of that, let's just eat, drink and be merry. Although if you're Gen Z, apparently you're eating at 6 o'clock.
Yes, so apparently bookings, according to Open Table in the UK, reservations earlier in the evening, about 6 p.m, are up an 11%. And there's been lots of questions about what this is doing to the restaurant industry and why this is happening, because post-pandemic, it seems that we are reshaping the way we eat out. We are swapping late night food for early evenings. A lot of this is down to people living further outside of London, so they have to commute. There's also a suggestion that actually younger diners aren't maybe drinking as much as they used to, so they do have earlier dinners. They're taking their health more seriously. They want to get more sleep. But also I think there is something that wasn't really referenced in this piece, but you do hear about, is actually licensing laws across particularly London, where restaurants are forced to close earlier because they don't have licenses to stay open later, and how that is also impacting people going about their business and having dinner. But it is interesting. I mean, London used to be a place where people were drinking and eating late into the night, and now you'd be lucky to find a table post 9 p.m. in a lot of parts of the capital.
Very true. Zoe, thank you very much indeed. That's Zoe Grunwald there, Westminster editor at The Lead. You're with The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. More than 60 migrants, mostly Ethiopians, have died after a boat sank off Yemen's southern coast during bad weather. Dozens are still missing, with officials calling it another tragic chapter in the region's deadly migrant route to the Gulf. More than 3,000 Boeing defence workers will strike today after rejecting a pay and pension deal, dealing a fresh blow to the troubled plane maker. The walkout affects sites in Missouri and Illinois, where military jets like the F-15 are built. And a woman in New Zealand has been arrested after a 2-year-old girl was found hidden inside her luggage on a bus. The child was hot but unharmed, and police praised the driver for preventing a potentially tragic outcome. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. Now for a look behind the headlines. Here's Monocle's executive producer Carlotta Rebello on why Switzerland is now the main destination for Portuguese expatriates.
Portugal no longer occupies the lead spot at the top of the European immigration table. According to the latest data analysed by the Portuguese daily Público, the country has moved down to 5th place, behind Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria and Lithuania. This follows years of it having the highest emigration rate in Europe. In 2013, more than 120,000 chose to leave, with the most popular destination being the UK. Instead, a growing economy, especially when compared to other Western European nations, seems to be keeping people at home. Portugal posted 0.6% growth in the second quarter of 2025, while the previous year saw a GDP growth of 1.9%. Tastes in destination have also changed. According to Publico's findings, Switzerland has replaced the UK as the most desirable for Portuguese expats, with over 12,000 choosing to move there in the last year, followed by Spain, France and Germany. Monocle readers know the benefits of the Swiss style of life, but also how much Lisbon has improved over the past decade. In 2025, it won our Safest Streets Quality of Life Award.
Monocle's executive producer Carlotta Rebello there. And for more from Monocle's editors and our correspondents around the world, do sign up for our free daily newsletter, The Monocle Minute, at monocle.com/minute. It's 12:32 in Dhaka, 7:32 here in London. On August the 3rd, Bangladesh began the trial of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina for crimes against humanity. Hasina is being held accountable for the deaths of over 1,400 people during student-led protests in July last year. She fled to India by helicopter on August the 5th last year and remains in that country. Despite Bangladesh's extradition requests, India has not complied. Prosecutors have described Hasina as the nucleus of all crimes and are seeking seeking the maximum penalty. Well, I'm joined now by Redwan Ahmed, who is a journalist based in Dhaka. Redwan, thank you for coming on the show. Can you just bring us up to speed on the Sheikh Hasina trial? What's the latest?
Thank you, Georgina, for having me. And yes, as you rightly pointed out, the Sheikh Hasina, the ousted Prime Minister of Bangladesh, is currently in trial of Bangladesh's International Crimes Tribunal. And, we have had the first day of witness testimony yesterday, which is like August 3rd. So right now, where it stands is, she is being charged with of crimes against humanity and mass killings. And also this case centers around the violent crackdown on student-led protesters on July and August last year. So, and which resulted as many as, I think, 1,400. The UN estimate is the death is 1,400. And I think that is also the estimate of the tribunal. And Hasina, along with her senior aides in the administration, is accused of ordering security forces to suppress demonstration with live ammunition and military equipment. So the prosecution, as you said, she is the nucleus of all crimes and seeking the maximum penalty. And so that is, they have started the proceedings. And one of the major accused was the former Bangladesh police chief, who has pleaded guilty and now is working with the government as a state witness. So this is how it is unfolding. It is very early at this stage right now. But yeah, it looks like the country is moving forward on this trial.
The trial's going ahead without her. India isn't agreeing to extradite her. How is that affecting India-Bangladesh relations?
So yes, the trial is proceeding indeed in absentia because India has turned down repeated extradition requests from Bangladesh. And so, the Indian courts may deny extradition if there is a risk of unfair trial or political persecution, which Hasina's legal team claims. And so he continued to be present in India, and that has definitely put a lot of strain on the bilateral relationship with Bangladesh and India, especially with the interim government of Bangladesh that India did not really or very upfront about. And so the interim government has also accused India of, in quote-unquote, double standards. And, the public sentiment against India within the Bangladesh is also very rising, especially among, the Islamist factions and also the nationalist factions. So this is, a huge, irritant factor in the diplomatic ties between the two very close neighboring countries. Bangladesh is bordered on the sea side with India, and that has huge implication on the border and also, more economic and security issues as well.
I mean, if she is found guilty, she isn't there. What will that mean practically?
So this is also another major hurdle in this whole justice and accountability issue, because she is in trial in absentia, and that there is no good precedent that any justice that came out of such kind of trials were free and fair. So, and also she is tried in Bangladesh's International Criminal Tribunal, International Crimes Tribunal, which also under Hasina regime did also try former Jamaat activists, Jamaat leaders for the crimes against humanity, for the war crimes that allegedly took place in 1971 during Bangladesh's liberation war. So, and there are huge criticism of that court, that justice was hurried, and it was kind of a kangaroo court. So this is kind of the same court. It is now just the sides have changed. The people who are being tried now, they are trying Hasina. So this is definitely a thing that people are very reserved about the outcome of the tribunal, and this tribunal that has been formed, and the new tribunal is also not immune from their criticism. So there are very fair share of criticism of this tribunal as well, but the government seems adamant that they would go forward with the trial anyway, even on her absentia and even all the criticism
so
of the new tribunal.
Her party, the Awami League, Hasina's Awami League, is barred from elections. What does all this mean then for the political landscape in the run-up to the April 2026 vote?
So with the Awami League's exclusion, and that the much debated elections or anticipated elections of next year, which might happen even in as early as February as well, The EU knows the interim leader had promised April, but then I think the BNP, the largest political party now, with the exclusion of Awami League, they're demanding for early elections. So that might happen like earlier than April as well. But yes, with the Awami League is one of the oldest and largest political parties of Bangladesh. So they had a huge vote bank and huge supporter base. Those many of them are not necessarily part of this alleged crime. So this is definitely it creates more space for the other political parties like our BNP and notably the student-led party, the new party that came out of this uprising was National Citizens Party, the NCP. So, but now the problem is like the country is also based very heavily on the UN findings, the UN Human Rights Office findings on the accusation of crimes against humanity. But that the same findings also did say that they did not advise banning of a political party, which the interim government Bangladesh eventually did. So they did ban the political party Awami League, and that also risks creating a huge, the risk of disenfranchising a huge bunch of electorates who might have been voted for Awami League if they were on the ballot. But it creates a huge star in the local dynamics that the fight between the other political parties on those electorates and also the law and order situation and the risk of violence if their supporters, if Awami League supporters feel like they are feeling disenfranchised. So this is quite a different, very fluid situation, and even in the Bangladesh in this particular political landscape.
Redwan, thank you very much indeed. That's Redwan Ahmed talking to us from Dhaka, and this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio. Now it's 14:40 in Singapore, 8:40 in Zurich, and Singapore is gearing up for one hell of a party. Next Saturday marks 60 years of independence, and the city-state intends to celebrate in style. In 1965, Singapore separated from the Federation of Malaysia, and since then it's become one of the world's most prosperous nations, largely down to developing a free market economy under the leader Lee Kuan Yew. Well, joining me from Singapore is the journalist Adam Hancock. Adam, welcome to the show. I wonder if you could give us a very quick history lesson on Singapore. We know it gained independence from Malaysia 60 years ago, but before that, it was ruled by Britain for 144 years.
Yes, it's got a very interesting history for such a small place. You might have heard of Sir Stamford Raffles. He's seen as the first explorer to find Singapore. That's why there's so much in relation to him around the city, the famous Raffles Hotel, of course. Then it was under British rule. It went under Japanese rule during World War II, but then it was handed back over to Britain. And for large parts of that time, it was just a small trading port, really, obviously in a very good location strategically, near the Malacca Strait, but it was nothing like it is today. It was handed back to the British, as I mentioned, at the end of World War II. And then there was a number of years where Singapore was quite torn about what exactly was going to happen. And then independence came in 1965. It was signed in the evening. And Lee Kuan Yew, who is the man who was seen as the founding father of Singapore, really, he wrote in his memoirs about lying in bed, thinking about the pressure about Singapore becoming an independent nation, one that he was going to have to lead and try to grow. And grow it he did. And really, he's the visionary for what Singapore is today. His strong leadership, and he was a very strong leader. Not everyone agrees with his methods of leadership, but it certainly was effective. It turned it from a small trading port into the developed ultra-modern city that we've seen today. It was nowhere near as small when Singapore became independent as it was when Stamford Raffles first came here, but he still had a heck of a job to do. He focused on the fact that Singapore had no natural resources, so therefore had to be very open to business, had to attract business and foreign investment. He says that air conditioning is one of the greatest inventions of all time because it allowed people to be productive in the heat. We're right on the equator here. It's tropical and steamy all of the time. And he also fought about the way that the country should be ruled. He had long-term planning and vision, and the political system that they have here, it does allow Singapore to be the way it is because there's only one ruling party. They've been in power the whole time that Singapore has been independent. So there's not that kind of churn that we see in other countries where governments are just constantly fighting elections and trying to survive for 4 or 5 years. Whereas in Singapore, if the government say they want to do something, they basically have a mandate for 20 years to do it. So there's already plans in place for projects 20, 30 years down the line. So yeah, that's hopefully give you a little snapshot of how Singapore went from this very small little port to the city it is today.
And tell us about the themes of the celebration on Saturday.
Yeah, so Saturday is National Day. It is an annual event and there is an annual parade. I think this year will be a lot bigger than usual because it is the Diamond Jubilee. And, in Singapore, what is interesting is because there aren't really seasons here, every day kind of feels the same. The weather's always very similar. There's no real passing of time. But one way of defining what time of year it is when you start hearing the helicopters going overhead and the jet planes because they're out rehearsing for the National Day parade. This starts months in advance. Then as it builds up towards the parade, each weekend in the month before they do rehearsals. So on Saturday night just gone, there was a huge fireworks display where they were practicing the fireworks. The city is covered in flags now, Singapore flags. There's lots of banners out. And there's lots of little events as well. So out in what they call the heartlands here, which is sort of the neighbourhoods outside the main city, on the actual National Day, there will be a parade with a huge mixture of vehicles. You'll get military vehicles, tanks, you'll get ambulances, the fire service, and just ordinary people as well who've been invited to be a part of it. So Saturday will be a big party. It will all end with the big National Day parade. There's a lot of things that happen the same every year in that parade. You'll get members of the military parachuting in. The same songs will come out. But I think this year the government have probably allocated a little bit more money. And I would particularly expect that the fireworks display might be quite memorable on Saturday.
I don't want to literally rain on your parade, but I wonder if you could tell us about the challenges that you think the country faces. I mean, have Singaporeans traded true freedom and democracy for prosperity?
Yeah, it's certainly interesting whenever you talk about, freedom of speech, freedom of expression here. It doesn't really exist, in all honesty. There's an unwritten social contract between Singaporeans and the government that they get a government that are efficient, make things better for them, but in return they lose a lot of the rights that people have in other countries. Many people are happy with it, as seen from the elections where the ruling People's Action Party always do very well. Whether or not that can continue going forward, the younger generation, they have a different view of the government to the older generation. Their respect kind of needs to be earned now. They didn't live through the big transformation that a lot of Singaporeans saw. Also, social media has opened up discussion in a way that was not the case before because the media is controlled in Singapore by the government. But obviously online, it's different and people can access different points of view. Also, as well, Singapore obviously tries to toe the line diplomatically. It tries to be neutral, the so-called Switzerland of Asia, but that is becoming increasingly difficult as well. The US and China, obviously, we know full well that they are constantly in competition. Singapore tries to be a friend to both. They have very good trade links with China, for example, whereas they have very good military links with the United States. The fear here is that there might be a day in the future, if there is a conflict between the two sides, that Singapore does have to pick a side. It's almost the worst case scenario for Singapore. So I think over the next 50, 60 years, it is interesting to see. A lot of people say that this kind of political system, it can't really last in a modern world. Maybe it needs the leaders like Lee Kuan Yew rather than the next generation of leaders. Although judging by the most recent election where the ruling party did very well, perhaps it will stick around.
Adam, thank you very much indeed. That's Adam Hancock in Singapore there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Sweden Sweden might be thousands of miles from the United States, but for unofficial Ragare members, the distance seems smaller. Across Sweden, followers of the subculture drive American cars and often appear to worship US culture. To ask about the movement's history and how it's changed over the years, Monocle's Xander Brett spoke to Tom Odell, a professor of ethnology at Lund University, and to Kjell Gustafsson, an organiser of Sweden's Power Big Meet, one of the largest annual gatherings of American vehicles in the world.
If you're out on the roads in rural Sweden, it probably won't be long until, after all the Volvos and European saloons, you come across an American car. And it might well be driven by a follower of the Ragare subculture, whose unofficial members all over Sweden are a bit like the American greasers, English rockers, or Antipodean bodgies and widgies. They own vintage vehicles, many play rock and roll and dress up in homage to their mid-century heroes, think jeans and leather jackets. Power Big Meet, in fact, an annual 2-day event in central Sweden, sees one of the biggest gatherings of American cars anywhere in the world, many with their Ragare drivers in tow. Kjell Gustafsson is an organiser of the event, and if you detect a certain twang to his voice, it's because he spent some time in Florida.
Power Big Meet started in 1978. We had been to car shows in the United States for quite a while, so we thought we'd do something. The cars are like 20%, and the social, meeting people with the same hobby and way of life, that's 80%.
Gustafsson may have had a stint stateside, but he doesn't know exactly how many Big Meet attendees have also traversed the Atlantic. Perhaps some Ragare have cultivated their own idea of American culture and adapted it to suit a Swedish setting. Tom Odell came to Sweden a few decades back and is now a professor of ethnology at Lund University.
In the 1950s, I don't think anyone had been there. They didn't have the money to travel to the United States. But what you did have is you had movies, you had popular culture. After World War II, American cars lost value very quickly, and that made it accessible for a lot of young men. They had the ability to start to purchase cars and to work on them. So the car became sort of a way for many young people to get out of the house and to get around. It was big, it was flamboyant, lots of chrome, it was shiny. Ideally, you'd have a two-tone paint job. When my father came over, to visit me, and he'd see these American cars, wow, these must be really rich people. And we'd be in working class neighborhoods. I said, no, these aren't rich people. But in the United States, if you had a 1957 Chevrolet, you were a doctor. It was expensive because you didn't work on the car yourself, but you bought a fixed up car from someone. That's not how it worked here in Sweden. You bought a jalopy and then you spent a couple of years working on it, fixing it up, helping each other in order to convert wrecks into, gems.
Kjell Gustafsson again.
We imported a lot of cars and parts from the States in the 70s when nobody really wanted them. They threw them away. You could get cars for pretty much free and shipping was pretty inexpensive. So we shipped so much stuff and so many cars over. This is on pretty much on a hobby level. It's getting harder now because there's less parts available, but it's there. And if you want to go get some part for your car restoration, you come to Sweden.
Today's Ragare are often seen merely as a bunch of harmless, if quirky, enthusiasts. It's a far cry from times gone by when their sometimes violent disposition caused disdain in certain quarters. The loud music of the Pilsner Ragare Brigade, though, has created a little renewed consternation. They and Ragare's old troublemakers have been the inspiration of numerous documentaries, songs and movies over the years. Here's Tom Odell again.
I was in the store the other day and saw potato chips called Ronny och Ragge, and they were a comic pair on a Swedish television show in the mid-1990s, and I haven't seen them or heard about them since then. So there is something going on out there, sort of a revitalization of Ragare in new ways.
Kjell Gustafsson.
It's not in the main cities like Stockholm or Gothenburg. This is like a local, small town, small city deal. A small little town of 800 people might have 150 old American cars there. And the thing here is that it's new generations coming in all the time. So you see a lot of 20-year-olds, 25-year-olds with their own American cars.
So there are new American car enthusiasts in Sweden and possibly new Ragare, not only of the Pilsner variety. But will the movement forever be tied to its rural roots? Tom Odell.
In Stockholm, you might still find some of the American cars, but I think it's much more of a rural phenomenon than an urban phenomenon. Something to do in the wintertime to work on their cars, to adjust them, and then in order to be able to drive them around on the nice days or during the summertime in Sweden. The phenomenon is changing. I was writing about this in the mid-90s, and since then, down here in southern Sweden, the occurrence of using the American cars seems to be diminishing. And instead, you've got young men, driving around in older Volvos. How do you even define what a ragare is? Does it have to be with an American car? Or is it the phenomena of basically driving around in cars and having fun?
Whether there's an official definition or not, and whether, if there is, it needs updating, ragare have been part of Swedish life for a long time, hanging out in a land that, like America, has a sparsely populated interior. To find such a strong subculture in the forests of Northern Europe, though, might still take you by surprise.
Sander Brett reporting in Stockholm. Thank you. You're with Monocle Radio. Now it's time to look at what's making headlines on the silver screen, and I'm delighted to say that I'm joined down the line by the film critic Karen Krasanovic. Karen, I'm sorry your lovely face is not in the studio. Where are you?
I'm on location at a Will Sharp drama. I can't say much more, I'm afraid.
Okay, but you're on set somewhere.
I'm actually on location, yeah. So so this is why I'm not there with my lovely face and your lovely face.
It's been a great summer for the movies, and the autumn looks good too. Can you give us some box office news?
Oh gosh, well, people keep asking me, which is great about being a critic. Should I see Superman? Should I see Fantastic Four? And what about Naked Gun? And the great thing is that they're all really good, and that's really nice. And I've been telling people, see Superman. You don't like it, I will buy your ticket, and that has worked. People have seen it, and I'm not out of pocket yet. But Fantastic Four is also, even though this week, it's second week, it has dropped 66% at the domestic, that is the American box office. It's still doing incredibly well. And considering this is often considered a poison chalice because so many iterations of this particular superhero, I suppose, franchise have happened, and they've been pretty terrible. And this one is actually very fresh, very surprising. And it's designed by a previous concept artist, which is not unusual, but it looks very, very different. And you can look at it, and I know I talk about research a lot, but you can see the design of this film is unlike anything you've seen before, but it also reminds you of certain other things you've seen before, like perhaps Ariel Saarinen. So it is excellent, and I would say go and see it, even if it did drop 66% of the box office.
Now, everybody's talking about this pairing of Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson in Naked Gun. Is it only on the screen? Are they an item?
Apparently they are an item, yes, they are, and why not? They have a wonderful chemistry on screen, and she's got amazing comedy chops. I mean, he's quite good too. It's difficult for a grown man in his 70s to not look great in a short tartan skirt, though. But it's, I mean, even if you didn't see, and I was talking with people who are in their 20s, and they're going, I have no idea what this is. I don't know Police Squad. I don't know The Naked Gun. But my dad likes them, So this could be a unifying film. It could open up younger people to a kind of humor that previous generations found fascinating. But the real value here is Pamela Anderson. She is hilarious, and not to give you a spoiler alert, but she gets up on stage and sings a scat jazz song, which is hilarious.
Sounds amazing. That's absolutely on my to-watch list, as is Jaws at 50. 50 years since Jaws was made. That's extraordinary.
I know it is extraordinary. And I have to say, I know that there have been a lot of podcasts and programs and shows and documentaries, and the film is coming back to at least UK screens on the 29th of August. It's I've already booked my tickets for IMAX. I thought it was 3D IMAX, but of course I don't think you can have that. It's just too much. But 50 years, yeah, you think, wow, it's 3D and it's big. But 50 years, and it's still fresh. And you'll have people that will say, like 2001, they'll say, oh, I don't want to watch that. That's boring. If you watch it, you will understand why it is now a classic. Now, I don't generally say watch documentaries, but I've watched most of the Jaws documentaries. And if you are interested at all in seeing Jaws, or if you love Jaws, please watch, I think it's on Disney Plus, Jaws at 50. It's a really good documentary, and it will tell you stuff that you didn't know about the production and about Steven Spielberg, and about Bruce the Shark, named after his lawyer. If you think you know everything about Jaws, if you watch this documentary, you will realize that there's a lot to know.
Karen Krasanovic, thank you very much indeed. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers Laura Kramer, Tom Webb and Anita Riotta, our researcher Henry King and our studio manager Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and I'll be back with The Briefing at midday in London. Lots of great music too, lots of sharp programming, and The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.